at that, so please do take a look at it. We're in the hall downstairs. And as we kick off, I would like to welcome Karim Kadura, the former youth mayor of Aarhus, who in this brief contribution that he's titled I Have a Dream will share some reflections on hope, responsibility and the role of young voices in shaping the future as we go into this afternoon's session. So welcome back. Thank you.
I have a dream. A dream that children like Hind Rajab can play freely without fear of being killed. That journalists like Hamza Dahdouh can report from Palestine freely without being targeted and without getting killed. That nurses and doctors like Marwan al-Sultan can go to work and return home safely. I have a dream that no mothers and no fathers have to fear that their children will die of hunger or cold. That children do not have to fear whether their parents will survive that journey to bring them food. That no children are woken in the middle of the night of fighter jets over their homes. I have a dream that children can go to school without fearing that the classroom will disappear overnight. That young people like me can dream of an education without it being interrupted by hunger, bombs, or displacement. I have a dream that Palestinian lives do not have to be explained, defended, or demonized, but protected. I have a dream of freedom, that people in Palestine can move freely without checkpoints, without siege, without fear. I have a dream of rights, that Palestinian children have the same rights as children in Europe. I have a dream of justice, that violations of international law have consequences regardless of who commits them. Isn't it absurd? Did you ask yourself that question? Isn't it absurd to have a dream like this? Isn't it absurd that we came here gathered from different European countries to dream about what exactly? To dream about freedom? To dream about rights? To dream about justice in 2026? Isn't that giving? Isn't that the bare minimum? But this is the sad reality. And while children are dreaming of surviving the night in Gaza, we in Europe are debating words and statements. And therefore, I also have a dream for Europe. I have a dream for the country I was born in, for the country that taught me the meaning of the words freedom, rights, and justice. A dream of a Europe that does not look away when international law is violated. A Europe that does not speak about values, but actually acts upon them. And to be honest with you, I do not believe that hope is naive, because without hope, we accept the unacceptable. And I, Karim Kadura, refuse to do that. Thank you very much, and free Palestine.
Thank you, Karim, for also reminding us why the hope is there with the younger generations and all of you in this hall here today and beyond. So thank you for that. Our next panel discussion is on a very important topic, a topic of the hour. It's about international law. It's about the international legal order. And the question is the international legal order at risk? And for that, I have an extremely esteemed panel. So I'd like to ask the following to please join me on stage. So Tim White from ActionAid Denmark, Wiebe Claro from Amnesty International, Erkki Tuomia, from former Finnish Foreign Minister, and Mogens Lykketoft, former Danish Foreign Minister. So my apologies if I have butchered anybody's name, trying my best. Please, welcome to the stage. Please. Is Tim White with us?
I just met him, yes.
Perhaps he can join us if and when he gets here. That's absolutely fine.
Skal vi rykke nærmere?
I suppose I could start by opening the first question up to the panel by asking, does international law even matter anymore? We stand at a time where we're being, I don't know if anyone saw Antonio Guterres essentially saying that the UN is, close to being dismantled. We're seeing open violations and disdain for international law. Does this conversation even matter?
Well, thank you. First of all, thank you for the invitation again to this conference. I was here last year, and I'm glad to see that there are more people here than there were last year. But in a year's time, I don't think that the situation has gotten any better. We have seen a so-called ceasefire taking place in Gaza. I say so-called, but it has not stopped the killings. It has not stopped the ethnic cleansing, which is still going on, not only in Gaza, but also in the West Bank. And so we cannot be very happy with the situation. We have, I would say, seen, they made a desert and called it peace, which was originally said of the Roman invasion of Britain, but it applies very much to Gaza, which is totally destroyed today. And therefore, I think it is extremely important that we continue to work for a just solution to the issue, but it is not yet in sight, because nothing in this so-called peace arrangement dictated by President Trump has any understanding of what a real peace would entail. So we need to keep on working. But originally, I came to this panel just a minute ago. I was still under the impression that the question was, why is it convenient to deny genocide?
Oh, well, that kind of connects very much to international law, doesn't it? Because I suppose genocide is prohibited under international law.
I have the simple answer to that, because recognizing genocide for what it is would entail that you also have an obligation, both legal and moral obligation, to act to stop the genocide and to put those who are responsible for it to judgment. And this is not happening, because nobody in European governments wants to do this, is ready to do this. It is an indication of the double standards that European governments have been applying for several decades already. And I often, when I speak with people from the global south, not only the Middle East, but global south moreover, is that, yes, you have asked for sanctions against Russia, against the illegal occupation of the Crimea already in 2014, which was the right thing to do, of course. But why have you not done anything for over 50 years about the illegal occupation of the West Bank and Palestinian regions? So this is a question to which there is no good answer. But we must work to change this. But we are working in an environment today where respect for international law is really crumbling. And it is not only Russia, it is very much President Trump and the US which is doing it. And I would say that it is also a somewhat weak response we have seen from Europe on that. So instead of standing up for international law and condemning those acts who are clearly in violation of international law, the European Union and European governments have mostly stayed silent on the issue and have been very evasive. And this will only lead to a much worsening situation for everyone, actually, not to speak of the Palestinians who need this to have a respect for international law, because that would be the way that we can get a Palestine free from the river to the sea. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Viva, you and I were on a panel last year, and of course I'm sure that you've been continuing the very important work that you and your organisation are involved in, but I'm wondering how different that looks today, and perhaps this is both true for you and Tim. How different does it look trying to do the work that you do in the changed environment in which there's been such a significant erosion of the legitimacy of international law? How much harder is it, and what mechanisms are you and others considering in order to either challenge that or to continue to do the work that you do with the legitimacy that international law would previously have provided you with?
Well, that's true. I was here last year, and I was talking about the big work we've been doing on documenting and analyzing and concluding that there is in fact a genocide going on in Gaza, and trying to describe that that was not just a thing that happened after October 7, but was enabled by a system and a structure that's been building for decades, most of all and most importantly stating that there is an apartheid system within Israel and in the occupied territories. There's been a blockade and there's been an unlawful occupation, and all of that enabled the genocide that we are now seeing. And yes, it is of course difficult to have and continue to try to persuade governments to act on that knowledge, but I also feel that there's been, within this year, there's been a change in the global community. Important people are starting to speak up. We see more states saying there is a genocide and we have to act. Not enough, obviously, but I feel there is a growing momentum to at least acknowledge that there is a genocide. And so I'm trying to hold on to that positive note. But it is, of course, it hasn't stopped. It's ongoing, and we're documenting that as good as we can. And we try to mobilize people to amplify that voice and to keep saying, we need international law. We really want it, and we can see the importance of it. And I think that's the task we have, to really fight for that international law and order, and because otherwise we will never, ever stop the impunity that we see going on in Israel. And Israeli leaders have for decades now realized that it's without consequence to have an apartheid state. It's without consequence to commit war crimes. It's without consequence to commit genocide. And that is really, you cannot believe that we ended here, but that's where we are.
Well, can I ask perhaps, Eki, about the question of law in this context, and why it is that you think that our European leaders have been seemingly so willing to not toe the line of protecting something which was, for many of us, I mean, I'd be interested to see how many hands would be raised. I certainly, going through the French educational system, we're taught from a young age, that never again, millions of people died during the Second World War, and, international law was brought in to protect all of us from that ever happening again in Europe. And we were taught that this was absolutely sacred, that this was, a structure, an edifice that was created off the blood of millions of people, and we could never, ever let that go. And yet, we see an absolutely toothless international community, European leadership, when it comes to confronting the deliberate and unequivocal attempts to dismantle the entire system. So why? Why have we accepted as Europeans to do away with this entire edifice? Yes, please.
Yeah, but one remark from me first will be, there never was a binding international law. It's a work ongoing. There have been a lot of violations of international law also in the past. You framed it as if it was from an ideal to nothing. That's not the case. But of course, we have had a huge counterattack on international law, represented nowadays both of the performance of Israel, but also the total support of that performance from the United States of America.
Yes.
A declaration of ending any kind of respect for international law from Washington. But I think in Europe the discussion has been not very good progress on implementing what we have obliged ourselves to do. For instance, join the International Court of Justice, join the International Criminal Court, because we have committed to that. US didn't do that, Israel didn't do that. We have done. And there is a clear double standard in our action when it comes to Russia, compared with what's going on in Israel-Palestine. And that has been the discussion, but it's a discussion that, in my view, still upholds for a huge part of the population the idea that we actually should live up to the commitments we have once accepted, ratified, and said we would follow in every step on the international scene. So there is this is not at that discussion, but it is a fact, which also is a fact in the United Nations, where I worked as President of the General Assembly 10 years ago, that all the ideals we wrote down and committed ourselves to also in UN never worked to full force when the biggest of powers didn't apply to them. That was a fact from the beginning, that's a fact now. And we are in a very difficult situation in this world where right now, if you look at the President of the United States, if you look at the President of Russia and the Prime Minister of Israel, we have three examples of heads of state you couldn't expect respecting any kind of agreement you made with them.
But I would put to you that there is a difference between the open flouting of international law, as we have always seen historically by the great powers, as you point out, and the deliberate attempt to dismantle the entire edifice of international law as a common reference point. And I think that is something that's quite distinct about the moment that we're in. And I suppose what I would ask the panel is, where are the European political leaders to say, yes, this is an imperfect system, yes, it's never worked as coherently as it ought to, but we absolutely have to stand by it? I mean, can we start maybe, Tim, let's talk about some facts on the ground. So we have UNRWA being dismantled as the main body overlooking the services for the Palestinian community in Gaza. So that's one example of the kind of concrete dismantling of international law in Gaza. And that's being replaced, of course, by the so-called Board of Peace, which is essentially a commercial enterprise, right? Mm-hmm. Is it not the case that, even just a few years ago, that would have been denounced by the international community, that we would have said, that we would have heard senior European leaders say, absolutely, UNRWA must be maintained, and we would have fought for it? What are the implications of the shift that we're seeing for the type of work that you do on the ground?
Well, I think that European leaders are navigating in a rather difficult situation between a rock and a hard place. We have a war ongoing in Europe, in Ukraine, and we have a fundamental disagreement with the United States, which has been responsible for our security in Europe during the post-war period. So the European leaders are obviously at a loss to some extent, and they can only offer really weak responses. It has to be also recalled that the international rules-based order was never perfect. I mean, it did not prevent wars. We had colonial wars, we have had, and it had not reacted to the occupation in Palestine for 50 years, so it was not perfect, but it was better than what we are experiencing today. And when you ask who are the European leaders, I would very much like to say that the Nordic countries are those who have the most vital interest in protecting the international rules-based order and respect for international law. But I'm not sure that we are actually doing the job very well today. I would prefer to be a Norwegian today, because I think that Norway is the country which is standing up to those rules.
Well, of course, this has implications for you in Denmark, which is that if the international rules-based order means nothing, you yourselves could be colonized very soon. I mean, there is an argument now that the unwillingness to uphold the flouting of international law in Gaza has now led to Europeans themselves being colonized and America sort of being quite happy with that arrangement. I mean, Tim?
Yeah, and I think that's is this on?
Yes.
I think that's a good basic point to start with. I mean, it was a truism for many years when we talked about international law that we said this benefits all of us. We need this. It's not just about this particular country that currently is, experiencing hardship. In the end, small countries, small Nordic countries benefit from this. But I think we said it so many times that we almost stopped believing it. Certainly our politicians did effectively. I mean, let's be honest, it wasn't the first time that the Danish government has participated in highly questionable wars in other countries. But all of a sudden now, I think the chickens are coming home to roost. I mean, there is a sense now that the things that we had sort of said with ritually actually are important to us. International law is incredibly important for small countries, is incredibly important for Europe. But so to your question about where are our European leaders, I guess I would challenge myself and this audience also in saying they are exactly where we have let them be. I mean, we talk about this as if the international, as if politicians sign some kind of agreement that they will always abide by international law, as if the legal institutions will always protect us in all cases. And we all know at some level that this is not true. That the legal frameworks which we have been established through struggle. They have been established through populations being interested in whether it's workers' rights or women's rights or peace. They didn't come out of nowhere. They came out of popular movements that pressured governments that then formulated them. And I think if there is something hopeful in this moment, it is the fact that we now are confronted with the fact that no one can just be a bystander. We can't just sit around and wait for our politicians or our courts to settle these things. And I think that is an important call to action. We had earlier here Hind Rajab's mother speaking to us about what overcame her family. And I was reminded of a quote by Masha Gessen, a journalist who writes for the New York Times, who was writing in a review of that movie that, actually that movie was really not about Hind Rajab. That movie was about all the people around her. That movie was about if you look at who's filmed, it was the people trying to provide support. And the word they keep repeating is coordination. There is coordination on both sides of this genocide. There is coordination among states who are arming Israel, who are arming the people who are committing war crimes, but there also, and this is the hard part, there's coordination or lack of coordination among the rest of us. The tragedy of that movie is that it reminds all of us that we're watching something and we feel powerless to stop it. And we are questioning ourselves, are we doing enough? Are we making a difference? And I think the answer to that question needs to be we will do more. We will do more to preserve international law, to pressure our governments to actually act on it. And I think that's the moment that we're faced with.
Viva, you wanted to come in?
It's just because I think when we talk about We need to do more. And one of the things I think we really want to face as Europeans, and especially as Danes, is the growing racism. There is a reason why we have these double standards. There's a reason why we see politicians very engaged in the war in Ukraine, the unlawful invasion from Russia, the condemnation, everything, withholding international law, and then we see the lack of the same when it comes to Israel. And I think that is because there is this anti-Muslim, Islamophobic trend, and it's growing at the moment. And that is something that really scares me, because it's really growing, and we see that as a strong influence in Europe. And I think that's what we need to talk about in the coming years.
Do you have a sense of where that's coming from?
Well, I think we all have a strong sense of some of it coming from the US, but it's been growing among us, our own communities, for a long time. And that's also a decade-long trend, and now it's surfacing again, and it seems to be strong at the moment.
I guess my final question to the panel is: there seems to be, if we step out, a very clear attempt to reorder the global order, right? There's an attempt to create a new world order before our eyes, and it seems to me that there are sort of two camps. There's the camps of the new world order, who are sort of organizing the Board of Peace and saying, forget international law, we don't need to even consult it, we can create commercial enterprises, we can put money in our pockets, no one's going to stop us. In fact, we'll put, a war criminal, Tony Blair, on the Board of Peace. We'll put, the Russian President Putin will be on there to bring everyone in and make a great deal for them. And then there's the other camp that is sort of looking at this with consternation and sort of going, oh gosh, well, we must sort of uphold the old world order. My provocation is it too late? Has the horse bolted? I mean, are we not in the face of the need for a new vision if we are dealing with parties that have decided that they are no longer going to be respectful of the rules of the game? I mean, have fascists ever been stopped by rules?
And can we just say, this Council of Peace, should we stop calling it that? Call it the Council of Fascists.
I think it was Elon Musk who suggested that, I'm not usually one to quote him, but he suggested that instead of calling it the Council of PEACE, it ought to be the PIECE, which I think is probably the truest thing I've ever heard come out of Elon Musk's mouth, in fact. But so anyone willing to take up my provocation that actually, we're playing catch up with a horse that's bolted. They're not going to respond to, hold on, guys, we created this thing, please respect the laws. I mean, do we not need a different approach? Do the Europeans not need to wake up and their allies and realize that this isn't going to be stopped through pleading to the good sense of Trump et al.?
Well, for to take an example, when Trump imposed his tariffs on Europe and all other countries in the world, including this uninhabited island in the South Antarctic, Europe, instead of reacting clearly, which it had, the European Union had the sole mandate in trade policy, so there was not a question of who would do it. The European Union could have done it. It could have joined with all the other countries in the world, including China, in protection of the WTO system of open trade, and imposed counter trade. But instead, it's just threw it up its hand and kowtowed to Trump and minimized what it thought was the damage to Europe, never mind the rest of the world. I think that is a great example of it. But I would also like to say that when we are talking about international law or the rule of law in general, we are also talking about democracy. Because without democracy, rule of law and respect for international law will not prevail. And that is something which we are seeing in today's world, that the number of countries and people who can elect freely and free and fair election for leaders has diminished greatly. And therefore, I think it is of utmost importance that we, within the next year, can have democratic elections in Palestine, which have been prevented by Israel's denial of voting in East Jerusalem. And I think that would show a good example of what democracy can achieve.
Yes, and presumably then see the election of somebody already in prison, since everyone that is likely to win that election is behind bars. But please.
My point about these competing camps about international structuring is that I think still, and then my experience also from working with the UN, there is a huge majority of countries in this world that wants a kind of organized legal framework for cooperation between countries. Many more than are actually themselves democracies back home. And I think the Trump phenomenon will hopefully disappear as an alternative for everyone. But of course, right now, a lot of countries are considering, should we bow for him because we have other interests at stake here. The Europeans are not speaking very high. Many Europeans are not speaking very high on the Middle East because of Ukraine as an essentially local actual security problem for us, and so on and so forth. But with the change in the US, I think there are all possibilities of reconstructing a kind of international order. But my point is, what I also said beforehand, it was never a perfect construction. But there is good perspectives of coming back, because the understanding, I think, also at the end in the United States will be that it was not only for us. They had a genuine interest themselves not to be in war, at least on trade, with everybody else in this world. That will come forward at some point. But going back to the specific questions of Palestine, genocide, and so on, we all have to realize that our possibilities to influence it will always be limited as long as in the United States of America there are full support for Israel. And you have that with Biden until he disappeared into the dark. And you have that from Trump. So it will take not only Europe to be more courageous, it will be brilliant if it happened. We shall all work for it, but without a conceptual change and understanding in the United States, we will not fulfill our purpose. And the good thing is, talking of Palestine, talking of genocide, the public opinion in the United States has actually changed more than the public opinion in Europe.
Yes, it has.
I mean, to your point, the polls show that over 50% of young people now in the US do not support Israel, which is why they decided to take over TikTok. I guess I'm not entirely certain whether public opinion is what matters most to politicians at this point, which is to your point about democracy. But final points, if I may, from the two of you, and then I think we may have to wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I guess I'm just to your question of.
I think Tim's mic is. Yeah.
Is that better?
Yeah.
To your question of whether it's too late and we need to find other strategies to fight fascists, I mean, I understand where it's coming from. I also feel like in a way it feeds into a little bit of the narrative that it's hopeless, that we can't actually win, that we can't actually do anything. And I think that's actually benefiting someone else. Mm-hmm. I mean, the truth is that there have been moments, there has been progress. You've mentioned the massive shift among the public opinion. More recently on international law, you know, we from Denmark and Europe managed to push back, at least for the time being, on American plans of taking over Greenland. That was also in part based by massive popular mobilization here. in the U.S., you can clearly see that the mass mobilizations, democratic, nonviolent, in Minneapolis have managed to push back on armed, masked representatives of the government walking in the streets. Have they won? No. But the point is that if you're saying it's hopeless, there probably won't be more people that show up. And I think we need more and not less. So I mean, in addition to wanting popular protest, legitimate elections in Palestine, my biggest hope for this year is we have legitimate elections in the U.S. I think.
Yeah.
I don't mean that facetiously. My point is that I think we actually have to defend the democratic process, and we have to work within it. I do think there is a potential for some, gradual, yes, but nonetheless very important progress if we don't give up hope.
Yep.
And I think, yes, you're absolutely right, Tim. In Amnesty, we've been calling out the international system for very long and said it's broken, it needs to be fixed. But I place enormous trust in us. There are so many of us who really want this world to be better and who really believe in a rights-based world order and in democracy. And the past year, we've seen Generation Z around the world rising up. They're tired of corruption, of mismanagement of their countries, and there are other countries where we see a strong voice for a change. And it might not be in Europe at the moment, but it's around in the world. And I'm very hopeful that we will, when we join each other next year, something good has happened also in Palestine.
Thank you very much. Thank you to our wonderful panel. Thank you. For this next section, we will be asking the individuals who are involved in the workshops, I believe, to come and share some of their feedback. Of all of those people in the room? If not, we can go straight to Mads and I chat. I don't see any hands raised, so Mads, shall we? Okay. Oh, I see one hand. Yes? You have a question about the session that we just had? Thank you. I think we will have some time for questions from the audience in the workshop session, but I'm just going to wait for all the people who've come back from those sessions to come on stage, and then we can get a bit more involvement. But thank you for your contribution. At this point, in that case, I will invite somebody many of you will recognize, of course. Dr. Mads Gilbert is an emergency physician with long-standing experience working in Gaza, and he is going to share a few slides with us, and then we are going to have a discussion about the collapse, ? Of the medical system in Palestine. Mads, please.
Assalamu alaikum kullu. God eftermiddag and good evening, and thank you for the warm welcome. I send that welcome directly further to my colleagues in Gaza, because I am only a small Norwegian white man representing sometimes my colleagues in Gaza. They are the ones who deserve all the applause and all the support. So please give a big hand for the Palestinian people. Since we stood up this morning, 6 o'clock probably, until now, the Israeli occupation army has killed on an average 2 Palestinians per hour today. According to the latest Al Jazeera update, they have killed so far in Gaza today 31 Palestinians, among them many children. You call that ceasefire? I don't know if you can see the writing on that up top. They have killed now more than 500 Palestinians since the ceasefire, so-called. They have injured more than 1,200. They have occupied, as you can see on this UN map, more than 60% of Gaza. They are still strangulating water supply, power supply, medical supplies, food supplies, tents, blankets, everything you need for a living. And they have destroyed more than 82% of all buildings, and they continue to do that. Next slide. And not only do they occupy, but on this report from BBC the other day, you can see how they're moving the yellow line to the west. Gradually, meter by meter. They're building big earth dikes now, so they're actually compressing 2.1 million Palestinians on less than half of the 360 square kilometers they had before. All with the support, all with very little protest from Europe and from European governments. I haven't seen any mainstream media today reporting on the execution, the killing of 31 Palestinians in Gaza. Imagine the headlines if the Palestinian resistance had killed 31 Jews in Israel today. And this is the racism. This is the fundamental racism that we are fighting against. Next picture. This is little Doha. And she is one of those 500 being killed since the ceasefire, so-called. Her family was bombed right before Christmas in the middle area, in Derballa. 8 were killed, 4 were injured. Doha was one of the 4. The brave doctors, the Palestinian doctors and nurses in Al-Aqsa Hospital, did work through the night to save her from her big hip fractures and the open abdomen with shrapnel injuries. And you can see on the next picture that she is treated in a very sophisticated ICU environment, not by some white doctors coming by, but by the Palestinian doctors and nurses themselves. She died after 2 days. So the total number of killed in the family was 9, with 3 survivors. These are the pictures, these are the images of those 500 plus having been killed since the so-called ceasefire. And the silence and the neutrality and the lack of action from the European governments, including EU, makes them complicit in genocide. That's the pure truth. They are complicit. And I'll tell you why. Like Desmond Tutu always said, the famous South African archbishop, he said, if you are neutral in a situation with abuse of power, you are on the side of the abuser, of the oppressor. So that's one thing. The second thing is that once Trump started to threaten Greenland and Denmark, the European leaders immediately started to talk about an economical warfare. Macron called it the bazooka economy, meaning firing back at the United States with immense increases in taxes. And we know that TACO happens. You know, TACO is the abbreviation for Trump always chicken out, TACO. So Europe immediately saw that they could wage an economical war against the United States and probably pressure them to let Greenland alone. Why didn't they do that with Gaza and with the occupation of Palestine? They had the possibility. And as has been said many times today, they did that in full scale with Russia after the occupation of Ukraine. So these bottomless double standards is part of the moral collapse and the moral crisis in the West, not at least in Europe. It's too much talk, too little action. They have the tools. They've shown that against Russia. And let me add that there is no principle or fundamental difference between the armed struggle of the Ukrainian people and the armed struggle of the Palestinian people. Both deserve support. I don't support Hamas, I don't support Jihad, I don't support PFLP or Fatah or PA or any Palestinian fraction or armed wing. But I support the Palestinian people and their right, their constitutional or if not internationally legal right to resist occupation with arms, of course within international law, not attacking civilians, just as the Ukrainian people has the right and are supported in their endeavor to fight the Russian occupation with arms. So I fully support the resistance and I fully support the right to fight with arms. Thank you. Done.
No, thank you.
Oh, the last one, the last picture. The last picture, the last picture.
Yeah, tell us.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's
No.
Edward Said. Edward Said. You know, Edward Said said 24 years ago, Edward Said, he said the following. He said, can we have it? Can you find it? There we are, the brilliant Edward Said. And you can see what he said. He said, no, the last one, next one. Habibi, we've seen this. Yes, Habibi, very
Next
good.
one.
Now there.
Yes, sir.
In fact, I cannot think of any other country on earth that in full view of nightly television audiences has performed such miracles of detailed sadism against an entire society and gotten away with it. Because what we see in Gaza and in the West Bank, it's not purely some sort of military conflict, military struggle. It's not just some sort of occupation. It is so much detailed sadism in the way that they have been strangulating healthcare, water supplies, food supplies, that it adds to the mere rationality of occupying Palestine. It's pure sadism. Let's not forget that. Yeah. Done.
Thanks, Ned. So just two questions for you, because obviously your familiarity with the Palestinian healthcare system in Gaza is on the par with very few other people. We often hear the term collapse of the Palestinian healthcare system. How would you describe what's happening on the ground there, beyond obviously what we hear in the headlines?
I'm very much in favor of what I call evidence-based solidarity. We have the feelings, we have the slogans, we shout, but we also need to educate ourselves. And one of my main sources is the OCHA weekly report, which you can all subscribe to. It's called the Reported Impact Snapshot Gaza Strip. It's delivered by UN OCHA. It has all the numbers. And from these reports and from my conversations with my colleagues in Gaza and from what I know about Gaza through all the years I've been working there under the attacks, it has not collapsed. But it is part of the colonial narrative that the Palestinians are helpless and that they always need to be supported by the white relief industry coming in and doing all the work for the poor and helpless and ignorant locals, the brutes, you know. This is old colonial story. In fact, the Palestinian healthcare workers, despite that the Israeli occupation army has killed more than 1,700 doctors, nurses, and paramedics, they have been operative all the time, finding solutions, rebuilding, reopening. Days, hours after the bombing stops, they reopen. Shifa is now running. They are doing open heart surgery in Gaza now because the Palestinian healthcare army, they see medicine as part of the resistance. And I consider myself, like my brothers and sisters in Gaza, as medical fedayins, because it is actually, it is, we just saw the film about Abu Safiya, the brave, incredible brave leader of Kamal Adwan Hospital. And in society, healthcare are some of the most important pillars of the willingness to resist. Imagine you have a family, you have children, they get injured, they get wounded, but there is always someone there to maintain some sort of medical service. Stop the bleeding, put in an IV. You come to this little castle of compassion and care, the hospital, and you feel strengthened. So one of the objectives of the Israeli attacks on healthcare, as on the universities, is to break the backbone of Palestinians' willingness to resist. And the Palestinian healthcare system never, ever surrendered to that. So they have been rebuilding, they have been reopening, they have been putting up medical stations in shelters all over. I've been teaching at Al-Azhar University as a visiting professor for 20 years, and my students, I see these students now popping up as young surgeons, as young doctors. The nurse students, you know, they have a tremendous capacity to find solutions. Only days after they had bombed Shifa the first time and burnt the new surgical block, they reopened the dialysis function in a corner where they had swept the floor and put in some glass. And you see the same in Nasser, in Kamal Adwan, you see it in Rantisi Hospital now. So no, it has not collapsed. On the contrary, they have enlarged it and they have done a fantastic job. So a big hand for the Palestinian healthcare system. Absolutely. That's not, Miriam, that's not to say that there has not been severe, savage attacks. I mean,
absolutely,
by
and
all
targeted
means.
attacks, right? So I was going to ask you about this. So obviously we've seen, you know, allegations of targeted attacks at specialists in certain areas, right? So, because obviously, you know, I'm not medical. Many of us won't be here, but it takes years, doesn't it, to train in the sort of specialisms that you can then operate on very specific cases. And we've seen targeted cases of attacks on those people that have those specialisms. So how does the healthcare system, you know, recover from losing these sorts of specialists who obviously presumably then train the people that come under them? Yeah.
Very good question, Miriam. And I think if my medical system in Norway, where I worked for the better part of 50 years as an anesthesiologist and an emergency physician, if we had faced the siege and the attack for these last 2 years, I'm not saying that we would have surrendered and completely collapsed, but we would not have been even close to managing the way the Palestinians have managed. Because, don't forget, these are the most hard-trained medical professionals in the world, together with the people in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in other parts of the global south, which have been under US, in particular, occupation and attacks. Because there is a moral core to being a medical person. And I think Abu Safiya said it very well in the film, that it is more than just a profession, it's a compassion, and it's a pledge to your people that you should stand by them, even in hardship. So part of the explanation that the Palestinian healthcare system does not collapse, also in the West Bank, is that these people are so trained in managing a hospital without power, without water, without food, and without a supply chain. And also you have on the ground, you have Palestine Medical Relief Society, for example, headed by Dr. Mustafa Barghouti. They have, I believe they have 70 primary healthcare teams with Palestinians on the ground in Gaza. Did you ever hear about that in the mainstream media? No. Did you hear about Dr. Matz and all the white going down there to help the Palestinians? Oh yes, every day. And that's part of the colonial narrative, you know.
Dr. Matz, my last question to you is about your Israeli colleagues. We have evidence, significant evidence now, of Israeli doctors being involved in the torture of Palestinian detainees, many of them civilians. there'll be people in this room, some of them doctors, some of them not, who will wonder, how is the profession, there are bodies, right, representing the wider profession of doctors, how are the medical bodies responding to these torturers in your midst?
Yeah.
Surely within these institutions there are calls for accountability, and if there are people in this room wondering, you know, what can I do to ensure I'm not sat on a medical panel, you know, opposite somebody who's been who's engaging in war crimes, you know, what can you do to sort of maybe identify them and ensure these people are sort of not normalized into the profession given what they're engaged in?
This is an old moral battle within the international medical community. There is a big body called the IMA, International Medical Association. The chairperson has been Zionist a few periods, and one of the chairpersons was an Israeli Zionist doctor who would not condemn the Israeli doctor's participation in torture. And it was a big battle to get him sacked. This goes on. But by and large, the international Western medical associations have been horribly silent since the attack on Gaza. We just published a paper on the complicity of Israeli doctors taking part in torture. There is no doubt about it. And this goes on. So it's an important question. I think that you could compare the international medical and the national medical associations to EU. You know, once they're pressed hard enough, they make a little beep, you know, to protest, but they don't flex their muscles when it comes to Israel. On the other hand, when it comes to Russian attacks on medical institutions in Ukraine, which of course should be condemned also, they're very active, very eager to condemn that. Mm-hmm. So again, it is this very double standards, anchored in, I believe, a combination of racism and guilt feeling from Holocaust, which the Palestinians never took part in, by the way. And it's a European long-lasting ambiguity towards colonial practices, because Europe, at the end of the day, was the fortress of colonialism. So I think for Europe, it is a hard thing to sort of make a real, to have a real recognition of their colonial role in history, mm-hmm. and understand that what's going on now is a new colonialism, which is even more brutal, and the focal point of that colonialism now is Palestine, and in Palestine it's in Gaza. So I think both medical associations and EU, the EU government, are extremely slow to react to the facts. Is
there anything that we as an audience, a body of people here, can be doing to ensure that the people who are treating us are not simultaneously either, you know, going off on holidays to torture people, or themselves kind of condoning something which, you know, from the outside is quite shockingly clearly, you know, against your Hippocratic oath?
Anything we can do to stop?
Yes, there's an audience here of people who presumably all use doctors on a regular basis. All their taxes will be paying for certain of those doctors' salaries, and some of them will be doctors and
Sure.
medical people themselves.
I think it's the same obligation as what you do when you go to the grocery store, or you go to a Christmas party, or you go to another party. You ask, what's your position on Gaza, on Palestine? And what did you do on Gaza and Palestine? It's on all of us.
Dr. Mads Gilbert.
No, I have a last...
You do,
final,
of course.
Because I listened with very keen interest to your previous panel and to the visit yesterday in the Folketinget,
yes.
in the Danish Parliament. And I was struck by two things. One thing was that I know there are many parties and many representatives in Folketinget who are supporting Palestine, yet we didn't have a chance to meet them.
No.
Probably because we fight more than we unite. Mm-hmm. So I think it's time for the activist movement to stop small quarrels and to unite on the big issues, because together we are enormously strong, but we are fractioned because the enemy likes to divide us, rule and divide. So we need to unite, and for Denmark as for Norway, we need to focus or pressure on the parliament and demand from the parliament that they impose sanctions on Israel immediately. And that's up to us. Number two, I listened with keen interest to the discussion about the demilitarization of Gaza. Norway was occupied by the Germans for 5 years, from 40 to 45. We threw them out through the armed resistance, popular fighting and armed resistance, with the support of the Red Army in the north and with support of the Allies. That said, if somebody had come to us in 1944, while we were still occupied, and said, could you please deliver your arms to the occupiers? You'd been shot.
What about Vichy France? Imagine the resistance of France being told to lay down your arms.
Why should the Palestinians lay down their arms? I show you the facts when they're still occupied and still being bombed. Long live the resistance and long live the armed resistance. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, gentlemen. And thank you, Dr. Mads. I'd like now to invite the people who ran the workshop. So if I can call up to the stage Ala, Zaid, and Mohammed Shahada to not give us a summary of the workshops, because that might take more than we have time for, perhaps to share a few reflections on what stood out in the workshops that you were running this afternoon. So please, could you join me on the stage, Ala, Zaid, and Mohammed Shahada, just because there might be a few.
Saudi's one.
Okay.
Sorry? Sorry, I have to run because I have to give a speech exactly.
I can hear you, but I can't see you. Are you here, Mohammed?
Being rushed to the stage.
Oh, he's rushing to the stage. Well, that's absolutely fine. Well, we can start without you, not to worry. So perhaps I can ask you, Ala, to begin by telling us, as I said, a few brief reflections on what stood out in your workshop.
Yes, well, thank you very much for giving me 5 minutes to talk about what we have prepared, indeed, since last year. As I mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and I'm not alone. Today, we are a group of lawyers here. Last year we came with 3 lawyers only we were, so we tried to build a legal action upon the European level. So this year we are around 30 lawyers together from mainly all European countries. So we hope so that in the future, next year, we will covering the whole Europe. So thank you very much. So our workshop bring together lawyers, judges, legal scholars, and other interested participants from across Europe who are engaged in legal actions supporting Palestinian rights. And the session of yesterday, because we have a meeting, a whole day meeting yesterday, discussing, sharing experiences. So the session focuses on legal exchange, strategic discussions, and the planning for the establishment of a coordinated European legal network. The workshop included experts' inputs, a group of discussions, and the launch of a new platform designed to support reporting of hate targeting Palestine and Palestinians. So that's why we are happy to announce you that we will be launching from tomorrow the Lawyers Against Genocide Association, which will put together lawyers and legal experts to share experiences, to report crimes related to Palestine and Palestinians. So, thank you very much. Some of the purposes that we are looking for is to reassure pro-Palestinian activists, because as you know, in your different countries, Palestinian activists are intimidated, and sometimes they are persecuted. So the purpose is to reassure them, define the requirements for more effective legal action at European level, launch, as I mentioned, a platform for sharing experiences, define joint actions, projects involving several European countries, and practical ideas for sustained legal engagement. So we were very happy to discuss that with the lawyers who were with us yesterday and today. I would like to thank every one of them, and hopefully that you will see very soon our website regarding the association Lawyers Against Genocide. So thank you very much.
Thank you,
Madam.
Ala, for sharing those reflections. Zaid?
Hello, everybody. I'm going to be just presenting some of the conclusions and results of the Education and Curriculum Development Workshop. I'm going to be reading from my phone because I'm going to be conveying the ideas that have come from the group. Participants agreed on one starting point. Education on Palestine has been constrained by lack of evidence, but not only constrained by lack of evidence, but also structures of power. How Palestine is taught reflects institutional dependencies, economic, ideological, and political, that shape what is considered acceptable knowledge. From this came a clear framing. Institutions face a real choice: reform or dismantling the structures that reproduce and continue to allow the harm that we see happening in Gaza and otherwise. Participants also emphasized that Palestine must be taught not only as a war zone, but as a society of people and human beings. Education that reduces Palestine to violence strips Palestinians of history, culture, and their humanity as well. Teaching Palestinian life, historical continuity, and intellectual production is essential to educational integrity. There was strong consensus on the need to center Palestinian scholars and voices. The Palestinian people are one of the most educated people of the world. And no disrespect or offense to any of the Western allies that we have, but maybe we should open up some room for more Palestinian scholars in our institutions, because they are more than qualified. Too often, Palestine is mediated almost exclusively through Western institutions, despite the deep experience of these Palestinian academics. And I'm happy to have been taught by these Palestinian academics. This is not about representation, but it's about rigor and quality of education. Other than this, concrete models were also discussed, including courses on empire and settler colonialism, such as those developed at Queen's University in Belfast, which participants urged institutions to replicate and expand. Participants also stressed institutional accountability. Universities and institutions cannot claim neutrality while benefiting and profiting from structures that enable occupation, rights violations, and genocide. Ethical investment, direct collaboration with Palestinians, and funding underdeveloped Palestinian academic fields were identified as responsibilities as well, not as optional commitments. If we can fund programs to the Zionist entity, we can also fund programs to the Palestinians and the rebuilding of Gaza. Students' experiences were also central to the discussion. We had some student activists in the group. Many feel isolated, exhausted, and exposed. What consistently makes a difference is visible faculty and professors, their support, and the creation of an internal support ecosystem that protects students and academics alike, especially amid visa revocations and repression targeting international students. The message from this workshop is clear. I can continue for hours and hours, and frankly, we barely had enough time to discuss these important topics. Education on Palestine must be structural, interdisciplinary, and protective, not symbolic and not isolated. Education alone does not liberate, but no liberation has ever succeeded without education. What we institutionalize now will determine whether this moment becomes another delay or a turning point for Palestine.
Thank you. Mohammed.
Not sure if this is working. Is it working now?
Yes.
Okay, it's me again, or actually, I'm not Muhammad, the translator from earlier. I'm his Danish twin brother, Muhammad. So it's good to see you. So in our group, we discussed politics, and we came with a lot of recommendations. There was a whole bunch of them. The first one is that it is kind of pointless to try to use moral persuasion with those in power, because it's not the lack of knowledge that makes them complicit. It's the lack of will. They're very comfortable with complicity. Being pro-Palestinian doesn't come with any benefits. It comes with sacrifices, and no one in power is ready to make sacrifices except for very few. So mobilization starts from the bottom up. Those in power, the only language they understand is basically power, strength. But strength does not only mean violence. It should not be violence at all. Strength is basically the popular will. It's we, the people. And on the popular will, individuals alone cannot act as a unified body. It was one of Margaret Thatcher's biggest achievements, is the destruction of society as we know it, the death of society. There's no more society, there's only individuals and nuclear families. So basically we need to restore some kind of organization, because in an individual capacity you cannot overcome the sort of difficulties. Organization is one way where people develop basic intellectual self-defense or the ability to have a voice. And one point that came up frequently is the issue with labor unions. So labor unions were mentioned a lot. I believe there were a couple of them in the room, but they just kept a very low profile. I gave them the floor if they wanted to rise up and explain themselves why they have been completely silent in Denmark. Nobody took that opportunity to be the most hated person in the room. So basically, there was another good point that was made by Wael Dahdouh, our great journalist from Al Jazeera, about persistence, that we need to keep trying, that all of us can still do more. Change is always very slow until it's not. An anecdote that I mentioned earlier is about Chomsky and East Timor, and Chomsky kept fighting for this very, very tiny country out near Indonesia that was under genocide, where 25% of the population were killed. And everybody told him, it's pointless. East Timor is gone. You're never going to win. Nobody knows about this place in the first place. So why do we keep fighting? To which he quoted someone that was said about Confucius. He said, Confucius persevered in a path with a certain knowledge that it was hopeless, not because he expected to win, but because you cannot afford inaction. He couldn't live with the burden of not doing anything. Most purpose in life is more burden than glory. You cannot live with the burden of doing nothing. Another point that was raised, and it was an excellent one, is that we need to agree on strategy, and then we can differ all we want about tactics. Once we have the strategy up here that we all agree about, each one of us can try in their own different capacity, in their own way, in their own avenue of work, without undermining each other. It's something that people in Israel do well. Since October 7th, I haven't seen any of the outspoken Israeli voices criticizing Ben Gvir or Smotrich. I was recently at a gathering where people were trying to, some people from Israel came over to be sort of like the voice of peace, the voice of advocacy for coexistence, blah, 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 normalization with the Saudis. And then a simple question was posed to them. All of them were very left-wing. I believe all of them were voting for Meretz, or even Moshe Feiglin, the guy that wants to legalize weed in Israel. So they were asked a very simple question. Do you think Netanyahu is a war criminal? All of you hate Netanyahu so much. Is he a war criminal? Did the IDF commit any war crimes in Gaza? And should there be accountability? And I took immense delight watching each single one of them twist into pretzels, quite literally, not even figuratively. One of them was like, define war crimes. I don't know what war crimes mean. He just forgot basic language. Another one was like, it's complicated. We need to wait for the legal courts to settle this. So that's the thing, the lesson that we need to learn ourselves in our own movement, but with decency, without this sort of moral decay and bankruptcy. Agree on a strategy, differ in tactics all you want. The other point is that we would like to continue the discussion on building a movement beyond this conference here. So one idea that came up is to send an email to the people that participated and registered to offer them the chance to be a part of at least the virtual network for now until the conference is held again, hopefully next year, 2027. And in the meantime, we can discuss tactics, we can have webinars, we can have groups, etc. We can... So, yep, that's all I have. I shouldn't talk all day because I'm going to show up again in another session.
The thing is, we would love to hear you all day, Mohammed, is the truth. So I want to say a huge thank you to all three of our panelists for that. Mohammed, thank you for reminding us to hold those people who come forward claiming to be interlocutors for peace to a very basic standard, which is to recognize the genocide and the war crimes. Ala, thank you for reminding us that these legal networks need to be in communication, learning from each other and supporting one another. We know that there are huge amounts of funding put behind attempts to prosecute people for all kinds of idiocies related to Palestine solidarity. So this is long overdue. So I look forward to seeing this take shape. We need more lawyers coming through for this, please. Please bring your friends. And last but not least, the question of education was a really great one to be reminded of in the context of recently speaking to some friends of mine who were with the students at Columbia. And I want to tell a brief story, if I may, of some of the students at Columbia who were expelled as a result of their advocacy. How many people in this room would, please, yes?
For the record, I'm from Colombia and I'm persona non grata from Colombia.
Okay, thank you. I did not know, we were at breakfast together and I did not know this. Okay, so well, this is going to resonate. So I was with a friend of mine that you may possibly know then, and a lot of these students, and I won't presume to know your situation, how many people in this room were applauding, rooting for the encampments? Raise your hand if you were in support of the encampments. Okay, wonderful. Excellent. Yeah, not as many as we'd hoped. How would you like to hear now that many of the students who were leading those movements were not just expelled, they were expelled with $100,000 worth of debt and are now unemployed and at least in some cases sofa surfing because they are literally working dive jobs because they cannot find a job and they are crippled with debt. And my question to our network, my question to our community of solidarity is those were some of the brightest students in the world, if I may, with the most incredible ethical principles. Where are the rest of us to message them, to offer them a job? Is there not anyone in this room that needs talented young people with an ethical backbone? Because there's a couple of them that could do with a little hand right now.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much to the panel. For the final panel of the day today, Mohammed is back. As I said earlier on the day, if you're not yet following him, he is an absolutely brilliant mind. You've gathered that right now, and you really must. We will be discussing the struggle over narrative. So I'd like to invite to the stage Liane Mohammed, Professor Ilan Pape, and Ala Adas, who was also with us just a minute ago. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you. Does everyone have a seat? Yes, we do. Liane, I'm going to start with you. Who speaks for Palestine?
Palestinians. Why is it so hard for people to understand that Palestinians are the only people that should determine their own future?
And why do you think it's so complicated? Why does it seem to be so difficult? You know, we sometimes see entire panels by even well-meaning people that don't feature any Palestinians. How does that happen?
I don't know, but all I know is that we need to do better in terms of amplifying Palestinian voices in everything, in every single panel, in every single field, whether it's academia, media, politics. Palestinians are not a voiceless people. There is a term that many people use, and it's, you know, I want to speak up. I want to be the voice of the voiceless. That's what many people say, and it's actually a term and a sentence that I extremely hate for many reasons. Because Palestinians have a voice. They have many voices and stories that they want you to share and amplify. They want you to platform them. They want to tell their own stories. They need you to amplify. They need you to help them. They don't need you to speak on their behalf and make decisions on their behalf. That's what the world doesn't understand and needs to do better on.
Thank you, Liane. Mohammed, as somebody who is actively involved in shaping the narrative online, what do you observe about whose voices are amplified, whose voices are marginalized, legitimized? And I ask this because I'm often surprised that I don't see you everywhere, frankly, and I really mean this. I think you're an absolutely brilliant voice. Both you and Liane are incredible voices, and yet, yes, others seem to be invited to speak instead?
No, I get invited for a lot of sort of backdoor, behind closed door meetings because I'm told I don't have a photographic face. I wanted to study journalism.
I think I hear some disagreement from the back there, Mohammed.
So I went in Gaza to the dean of the journalism faculty, Abu Hamza Turuk, so Wael would know him for sure. And I asked him, okay, I'd like to study journalism, and what's your advice? And he said, nah, it's not the trade for you. And I tried to get an answer, then he was very diplomatic about it. He said, if you study anything else, you can become a good journalist. If you study journalism, you're never going to have a job. I went and asked another person, and he was more blunt. He just said, your face looks like shit. I'm not on TV a lot, but I'm getting invited to a lot of those sort of like behind closed doors, backstage stuff. With the TV, the remarkable observation is that before October 7th, CNN in 2020, 2021, that was the Black Lives Matter movement. So that was the whole movement in the US that sort of expanded into corporations, etc. And back then, CNN tried to platform more Palestinian voices. So they reached out to me, to Muhammad al-Kurd, to others, and they wanted us to be contributors, to be analysts, to show up on TV, write articles, etc. So I did one interview, and then October 7th happened, and they deplatformed all of us. There was one journalist in CNN called Jake Tapper. He is one of the top 10 journalists worldwide. And at some point, he followed me on Twitter. I thought it was very weird. So he wrote me a question to ask about Ben-Gvir Smotrich, because this is the caricature of evil in Israel. Smotrich, Ben-Gvir, not Netanyahu, not the government, not society. And I sent him a lot of sources. Then the whole Shifa hospital invasion happens, and he unfollows and disconnects and blocks immediately, because he was under the sort of impression that under the Shifa hospital there is a lost Atlantis city of tunnels. Basically, complete deplatforming. The only time that me or any other Palestinian voices were shown on mainstream media, it was whenever it is to criticize Hamas. So the day that Hamas had this crackdown on collaborators in Gaza, they executed, I think, 7 people publicly. It was a very ugly affair. But on that day, my phone didn't stop. I got calls from CNN, ABC, CBC, CNN, the whole alphabet. I lost track of how many tried to call. People from Norway, TV stations from Iceland, TV stations from Canada, Australia, New Zealand, even some country called, I think, one of the two, either Slovenia or Slovakia, I always mix the two. So it was like an open buffet of phone calls. So that was the only time, confining us to the caricatural representation. The other one was at the very beginning of the genocide, where I was reached out to by some Danish newspapers and public TVs, and it was just basically like, I got this call. Oh, I remember it vividly. So someone called me, a producer, and she said, we have this simple idea. We're gonna come to your home in the morning. You wake up, we film you getting out of bed, you're panicking, you're shaking, you're crying, you're pulling your hair out, and then you sit to eat breakfast, you cannot eat, you're shaking, you cannot sit still, and then you try to call your family in Gaza, and we film you crying, we film them crying, if you manage to get to anyone, and that's it. We're like, yeah, go film that in Hollywood. Then the same producer tried over and over and over and over and over and over again for 2 weeks. So eventually I said, I will only give you a political discussion, analysis. That's my job. My job is not just to be a helpless victim. And they came over to do a live interview. And all of the interview was like, Mohammed, tell us how you wake up in the morning and you pull your hair out and you cannot eat food. And yeah, literally, there was nothing. So at the end, I interrupted and I said, where are the political analysis questions? And she said, yeah, I'll give you one. Why do you think people in Gaza refuse to condemn Hamas? So there's this deliberate disappearance, but at the same time...
Did you say because hummus is a staple part of our diet?
Exactly, yeah. No, but at the same time, so you see this process of disappearance, but the disappearing of Gazan voices made mainstream media obsolete. It became a caricature because everyone turned to social media to get the truth of what's happening in there, or to turn to channels like Al Jazeera, TRT, others, to see what's happening on the ground. So mainstream media just became the caricature evil. One story that gave me optimism is a journalist at the Wall Street Journal who told me that his wife and his daughter refused to sit with him in the same place. They would shame him constantly. They would say, you are a sellout. Another one was actually an American official, and he was one of Biden's top officials on Israel, Palestine, Gaza. And after leaving office, He wrote me at some point that basically he feels very ostracized, outcast by his own family, friends, community. He's basically marginalized. Another one in Germany like this. So even if you see change is very slow, those people are paying. You're not seeing it at the moment, but they are paying a price. And that was the price of disappearing Gazans.
Professor Pape, I want to ask you about maybe a comparative example around the narrative and the ability to shape narratives. So sometimes I think about the parallels between the Black civil rights movement and the kinds of people who would be invited to talk about the civil rights struggle in America on TV. And I was looking back through some old footage recently, and I was seeing interviews with, Angela Davis, Huey Newton, so members of the Black Panthers, Malcolm X, not particularly adored figures by white America at the time. And in fact, some of them were members of what they would term armed resistance groups. And yet, they were invited on sort of primetime TV to talk about why it was that they were engaged in armed resistance. They would be asked to sit on actually quite illustrious panels in some cases. How do you explain where the narrative is today on the Palestinian struggle?
Well, I think the issue is that for even the more progressive media and academia and pundits in the West, somehow the Palestinian liberation movement, especially since the Second Intifada, is not framed in the same way that liberation movements were respected and condoned in the 1970s, whether it was the FLN in Algeria, the Viet Cong in Vietnam, or the movements in South America. I think, first of all, it has to do with Islamophobia, because the movement has now more of an Islamic nature, if you want, image even, not necessarily representing correctly what the very complex composition of the Palestinian liberation movement is. But the image is of people who are more religious or more Islamic, if you want. Again, I'm not saying it's true, but that's the image. And the Islamophobia comes out in a very clear way. They cannot be treated in the same way that, let's say, secular leftist liberation movements were treated in the 1970s. First they were declared as, like the ANC, first they were declared as terrorists, but then, with decolonization they were sort of granted more respect and so on. But I think, of course, it's a wider issue here about the exceptionalism, about the Palestinian struggle for liberation. It's a struggle of liberation against the most important project of West Europe in the last 120 years. Far more important than the colonialist projects, because the colonialist project, whether in Africa or in Asia, were dismantled eventually. And Europe could say, we decolonized Africa, we decolonized Asia. Palestine is the only remaining colonialist project of Europe. So to give the same credence to the liberation movement against a European project is something that requires a total different European perspective on the role of Europe in the creation of the State of Israel, in maintaining it, in the oppression of the Palestinians, dispossession of the Palestinians. And of course, this is implication because it manifests the fact that colonialism is still alive in Europe, not only towards the issue of Palestine. So I think, and it goes back to the workshop we had on education, when I think some of the people suggested, and rightly so, where do you teach Palestine in the universities? Any university that wouldn't teach the Palestinian liberation movement alongside all the great liberation movements of the world, including those who fought the Nazi occupation in Europe, is an academic outfit that is not relating to reality, to truth, and to its commitment to solid scholarship and academic acumen. And I think that is very important. for us to, as I'm talking now about academics and so on, to legitimize the liberation movement by equating it and putting it with the same, on the same pedestal, that maybe it's, as you said yourself, it's easier for people now to say, well, some of them are, I mean, whether it's Angela Davis or anyone else, are now kind of respected as the voice, the moral voices of anything that is wrong with our society and so on. So it's much more than that's giving Palestinian voices, I think, on Palestine. It's giving Palestinian voices on international morality or international justice, because Palestine is now the epicenter of this conversation.
Thank you. Ala, I'd like to come to you for maybe a little bit of a legal perspective on the struggle to define the narrative, because of course we've seen people prosecuted across Europe for various forms of Palestinian advocacy, for tweets, for the River to the Sea chant. Can you give us a sense of the ways in which the law is being wielded as a weapon to silence forms of Palestinian advocacy, and the ways in which perhaps people can resist that or protect themselves from those challenges?
Yeah, thank you. So as we can see in all, unfortunately, in all European countries, and even upon an international level, all laws related to freedom of speech, all laws which were implemented and voted after the First and Second World Wars were violated. When it comes to a national level, you know, in France, it used to be called the country of human rights, but we discovered that human rights have a skin color, have a religion, and they are implemented according to the nature of the conflict. They are implemented according to the nature of the person who is concerned, who is prosecuted. For instance, if we compare the two situations between Ukraine and France, we have our president in France, Macron, 3 months after the aggression of Ukraine by Russia, he announced that, because Putin announced that he will cut gas, electricity, and internet from Ukraine, he announced that this will be a war crime. And when the question was raised about Palestine, he said that Israel has a right to defend itself. So this is, when it comes to rights, when it comes to human rights on a national level. When it comes to law and an international level, you can see the International Criminal Court when they asked that Netanyahu mainly and his Minister of Defense to be arrested. Even the European countries who are every single day talks about respect of law, mainly France, they allowed him to fly through France to go to New York. And even we heard many times some of American politicians asking even Trump to attack and to bomb the International Criminal Court. So unfortunately, Gaza shows us the truth about these national laws and this international law. When it comes to a country who is a strong country can use the international law against a weak country, we can talk about an international law. But when it comes to Palestine, every single time we find a way just not to respect the international law or the internal law. So, as I mentioned, in many European countries, freedom of speech, you can talk about any topic that you want, but when it comes to Palestinian issue, there's red lights. There's red lines. You cannot cross these red lines. And we are facing that now. And fortunately that this narrative, because we are talking about the narrative, people open their eyes right now about the truth, about the history, about the narrative, how the creation of the State of Israel, which is illegal inside Palestine, was decided. So people now can talk freely, more than freely than before, because we are lawyers here protecting them, defending them, and raising awareness about the violation of national and international law.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Leanne, thank you. Leanne, you're a politician working in the UK, but also a Palestinian British politician. How do you deal with the narrative challenges that come your way, and what kind of, advice, I guess, could you maybe offer from your experience of operating in the sort of brutalist theatre that is British politics, for navigating the sorts of questions that, are probably not helpful in trying to get you to define it on your own terms?
I think there has been a huge shift when it comes to controlling and who shapes the narrative, through politics especially. And to give you a bigger picture of this, I think, let me start by telling you how I decided to change the narrative through politics. So when the slaughter of the people of Gaza began over 2 years ago, I vowed to myself that life would never be the same. We cannot and will not stand by whilst bombs drop on innocents. Bombs that were made at home, where I live in the UK, by munitions companies licensed by our British governments. And so I realized that to stop this genocide, we needed to make the politicians listen. And so, the British, as you know, they absolutely love talking about the weather. We made them talk about genocide. The biggest example I can give you is the UK 2024 general election. And so, in 2024, our Prime Minister Rishi Sunak called a snap general election. This gave me 6 weeks, only 6 weeks, to be able to unseat a pro-Israel cabinet minister and Labour prominent politician whose name is Wes Streeting. And I stood as an independent candidate. I did not have his money. I did not have his party machinery. I did not have his nationwide support. No pollsters said that I would even come close. Everybody thought that I would lose extremely badly. They saw me as a young Palestinian. I was 23 years old at the time. Young Palestinian, 23-year-old, hijab-wearing Muslim woman, and they assumed that I couldn't win. They said that I wasn't serious. They said that I didn't belong. They said that I was a dreamer. Everyone thought that I would lose extremely badly, and especially Muslims, which is quite surprising. Yet, I came within 1.1% of defeating Wes Streeting, and now they are panicking that they might even lose the next election. So it was super close. I received 15,119 votes, and he received 15,647. Qadar Allah.
That's great.
But in the process, I upset the two-party system, and we sent a message that we have the power in our communities to work together, to hold those politicians accountable, those politicians who are responsible for this genocide. People power, never underestimate it. And the lesson that we taught them during the last election is that good people will stand up to this corrupt political class.
Yeah, sure.
Gaza symbolizes something greater. Gaza brought us out of our slumber. Gaza made us realize that our political system worldwide is broken. Gaza made us realize the power that we ordinary individuals have. And I think Gaza is now changing an entire generation for the good. We are all freeing ourselves from a system that has polluted our air, our politics, our minds, and our souls. Young people today especially have a greater cause. And Gaza has ignited a passion within us all that will be hard to extinguish. And so I think, if anything, Gaza has become a teacher for all of us.
Bravo. Bravo.
Hashtag vote Leanne Mohammed.
Thank you, I really appreciate it.
It's a testament to the hope that you represent, Leanne, and that you offer in, really at a time where I think a lot of people feel quite hopeless that change can happen, that change is possible, including within institutional politics, which I think a lot of people feel quite disheartened by. Mohammed, can I ask you to give us a little steer on, one of the big things that we're seeing Israel do is pump hundreds of millions of dollars into narrative control, shaping the narrative, trying to, they spent, I think, over 50 million trying to deny the use of the word famine in Gaza, for example. What do you think are some of the most significant narrative challenges that people ought to be aware of, and perhaps ways in which they can challenge that themselves without the 50 million maybe?
So I think for Israel, they're just throwing money in the garbage. If I were to give an advice to the Israelis, spare that money. And a lot of Israelis understand this. You cannot make the case for Israel anymore. You're not going to win. They get beaten very easily by kids on Twitter and TikTok. That's why they had Larry Ellison buy TikTok in the US.
Indeed.
And there is a reason for this. Number one, and the main reason, the only one that comes to mind right now, is that Israel as a society, and Ilan can qualify this further, has become so extreme, so consumed by hatred and genocidal mania, that they have lost the ability to fake, to pretend to care for Palestinians anymore. For example, if you get an Israeli politician on TV and they give a long interview about why Hamas is the problem and tunnels and hospitals and schools, you can get them to soil their pants with a simple question of saying, okay, after we destroy Hamas, after we de-radicalize Gaza, after every Gazan become a Canadian, just as armed as Canadians are, then what are you going to do next? Are you going to support the two-state solution, not equal rights, just the two states? And if any Israeli official says yes, they would be out of job by the end of the day. It became a political suicide to even pretend to care for Palestinians. They've lost that ability. There was an advisor to Netanyahu, a spokesperson called Ilan Levy, and he's a British whack job. What's the British word? Wanker. So basically, Ilan Levy, he at some point said something like, I oppose the mass migration from Gaza. I support everyone staying in Gaza, and in return we have to cancel UNRWA, the main UN agency that deals with Palestinian refugees, because if Gazans love Gaza so much, then they're not refugees and they shouldn't keep talking about the right of return. So that was his point. And then he got lynched by the Israelis right and left, and he had to apologize and say, no, I'm sorry, I'm in favor of voluntary migration and ethnic cleansing. I cannot support this anymore. But I think with that said, our biggest enemy, the biggest, most powerful Israeli weapon, is the simple phrase, it's complicated. How many times have you heard it from family members? And it's deliberate. It's not a coincidence. I mentioned that earlier in the workshop. I have a friend who attended sort of a workshop at the Israeli embassy in the US in California, the Israeli consulate. And the Israeli trainer simply told them, don't try to win people over. Just keep telling them it's complicated, it's complicated, it's complicated. And if they refuse to listen, tell them, why are you so obsessed with this topic? Is it because you're anti-Semitic? So scare them away. You're not going to be able to convince them. You're not going to be able to make Israel's case. And under it's complicated, we have basically three main problems. Number one is our problem as Palestinians right now, or a pro-Palestinian movement, of basically doing this informational overload. We have a lot of injustices to talk about, a lot of enemies, a lot of horrible things happening, that it ends up saying a lot that you risk saying nothing. I'll give you a simple example. When was the last time you heard about the Israeli massacre of the Palestinian paramedics in Rafah last year? Last year. That was the last time you heard about it. When was the last time you heard about the Israeli accusations of rape on October 7th? Every minute of every day, with every breath. We need to do something similar. Focus on a winning argument, repeated over and over and over again. There is, for example, the extraordinary story of Hind Rajab. It cannot be debunked or refuted, no matter how they try. It's the murder of a child that was begging on the phone and saying, I'm in kindergarten in the butterfly class, please come and take me, I'm afraid of the dark. There's the other element, which is the thing that I've been working on, is you focus on how Israel is basically a system of pathological liars. They lie and they lie and they lie and they lie. At some point I tried to collect the lies just off the top of my head, and I kept going. I was in an interview on Al Jazeera and I kept going for like 5 minutes non-stop, and it just kept coming to me. The amount of lies they say, they never tire out. And it goes into the it's complicated system. The second problem that we do as pro-Palestinians is we rely so much on what Israel does to us. And we rely on the main strategy of showcasing our basic scars of wounds, gunshots, burns, destruction, showing it to the world in the hope of evoking two things, anger and shock. But the problem with anger is that it burns so quickly, and shock, you have a function in your mind called hedonic adaptation that guarantees that you get used, desensitized, if you see the same kind of video over and over and over again for 1,000 times. So the only reason why it became sustainable is because Israel, for some reason, became very good at shocking us with new atrocities. There was no bottom to the gutter. They just kept doing more and more and more new horrible things. Every time you think you've seen the worst, they find something even more extraordinary. But the problem here is that, number one, Palestinians become passive victims, as passive victims in Myanmar, the Rohingyas, or the Uyghurs in China, instead of being active participants in their own struggle. We are active participants in our own struggle, but we focus more on what's happening to us rather than on what we are doing, what we want. There was a time when you had Yasser Arafat going to India where you would find 1 million people on the street. You don't have that leadership with the Palestinian leadership that we have at the moment, because they're unelected, appointed by the US, Europe, and a lot of them are wearing diapers at the moment. So we need elections as one element. There's the other thing about this sort of over-reliance on anger and shock is that as soon as Israel claims there is no more war, you disappear. And we've been this as Gazans for our entire lives. It's like Groundhog Day. We go through a major military assault, a massacre. As soon as Israel says, it's over, then everybody looks away. So that's why I think there's also the third problem, is basically the problem of being sometimes sort of too excited to the level of being delusional. There's the saying that I go by, which is Amelia Carr, who said, tell no lies, claim no easy victories. Sort of overselling ourselves that, we have a solid momentum, we can keep it going with the videos that come out of Gaza, and that's it, without doing the extra homework. And as soon as there's a ceasefire, it disappears. I get phone calls now from a lot of Palestinians who would say, yeah, you were right. As soon as the ceasefire is in place, we're gone. Nobody wants to talk about us anymore. I think the audience in this room proves this wrong to some extent, but you don't see demonstrations on the street anymore. So I think one way to get out of this is the way that South Africa did. Number one, in South Africa, they differentiated between what is called a comrade and an ally. A comrade is someone that agrees with you, let's say 99%, 100% in you in the struggle for death. An ally is someone that might agree with you only 1% on one topic. In South Africa, there was a politician called Helen Suzman. She was a white member of the apartheid government in parliament. She was a white parliament member. She was very critical of Nelson Mandela. She condemned Nelson Mandela for meeting with Yasser Arafat. She condemned the ANC for the use of armed resistance. She was against the BDS. She was against this and that. But she was an ally because she agreed with the ANC on a lot of things that had to do with liberal rights, which is why Nelson Mandela, when he came out of prison, he said Helen Suzman is the unsung hero of apartheid, the anti-apartheid movement. We have to differentiate between an ally and a comrade. Mao Zedong, although I'm not a Maoist communist, but Mao Zedong would always say something like, our struggle is to unite the many against the few, not to unite the few against the many. This sort of Puritan tendency of kicking out of our camp anyone that says one thing wrong here and there. And the other element is basically you need a freedom charter of Palestinians the same way they had it in South Africa, articulate a narrative that makes it difficult, near impossible, for people to cast any doubt or delegitimize your struggle. And that was the South African way, and that's what we need to work on at the moment. Thank you.
Well, with that, that is me going to announce that this conference is going to unfortunately come to a close. I'd like to thank my entire panel, Mohammed, Ala, Ilan, and of course the brilliant Mian Mohammed. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here. I'm going to end with just a few kind of notes, just recapping a few things. Firstly, obviously thanking all of you for being here, those of you who returned and those of you who've joined us for the first time. I want to see all of you back next year with your friends, with your colleagues, remembering Mohammed's wise words around strategic alliances versus puritanical politics. I think there was a lot to take from that. Let's remember that the connections you make here need to be in service of change, that you're part of a growing movement that is working. There is a reason that the pushback is as severe as it is, and that is because you are being effective. So please do not lose hope. You are the hope. Keep going. Thank you so much, and free Palestine.